So for this week, our first topic we're going to talk about is auditing. Yes, we've been here before, we've done some work with auditing, but I had promised we'd eventually look at going beyond the basics and looking at a full audit trail, right? Now, this is applicable to the work we've been doing with Web API because the same auditing code can do the job here, or we can also use it with our MVC applications as well, the particular approach we're going to look at using today, right? So it's good for both, and actually can be easily adapted to other types of projects as well. But let's just go back for a second, talk a bit about basic auditing, right? I think you'll agree with me, it was amazing, right? What we could do with relatively a few lines of code, right? Stuck in, one or two key places, and that was it. The system was virtually automatic after that point. We added a few changes to our whole save data procedure in our DbContext, and boom, all we had to do was inherit from the Auditable class, and as I say here, the rest just happens, right? So basically, all the information about who created a record and when it was last updated and who to blame or give credit for that, all gets stored with our basic audit information. Very, very impressive what we get done for a relatively small amount of work, right? But obviously, as the name basic implies, there are some real limitations to this approach as well, right? It doesn't track all the changes that are made to the data values, the property values themselves, okay? In an ideal world, we might say, well, you know what? I just want to know more than just that something was changed, but what was it changed from and what was it changed to, right? So a system that can store the old and the new values for comparison purposes, right? That would be very helpful. Think of a banking system, right? You go and you make a change to information in someone's bank account, right? Obviously they want to know, okay, what was it before and what was it after, who did it, et cetera, right? Things like changing foreign key values, right? That's something as well that is in particular very important. And of course, any other changes to related entities. Now, at some point, you're going to say, okay, that's enough. I don't have to care about every entity in the system. But that's one of the strengths of the approach we're going to take. Just like basic auditing, we had the flexibility. We could decide which entities were important enough. We would just inherit from the Auditable class for them, right, in the entity model itself. Well, we'll have some flexibility here to decide which entities we're going to provide our full auditing on and which ones we aren't, right? Okay, because we don't necessarily have to do everything, full auditing on absolutely everything. Oh, you can if you want to, right? Okay, now there are many approaches, right, that you can put in place here to get a full auditing system in place, right? You can just basically create duplicate copies of every table, copy information back and forth between them, et cetera, et cetera. That's an approach that's often been done in the past. This one in particular, we're going to take advantage of the built-in change tracking system to make it as automatic as we possibly can, right? Any framework core already has this, so we're going to capitalize on that. It already keeps track of, hey, has this entity been touched? Is it still exactly as it was when we first got it from the database? And change tracking will help us keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the data of our system itself, right? We will look at storing old and new versions of records, right? We're going to do that by serializing the data as JSON strings. Now, you could just serialize the entire record, but by a little bit of clever work, we can actually only store old and new versions of properties that have been changed, right? So we don't have to store all the identical data if things weren't touched or modified, right? And of course, we're going to track who and when all the changes are made, right? And we're going to, as much as possible, make sure that the recording of these changes into our database, it becomes fully automatic. Okay? Once it's set up, we don't have to think about it. It just happens, right? And of course, we don't want to override or get away from the basic auditing. We're still going to support that. So it'll work along with basic auditing. So, if a particular entity we don't really need beyond basic auditing, then we'll just leave that with the basic auditing in place and just we'll add more in addition to that for entities that we feel are important to have full auditing as we go. All right, so it sounds absolutely fantastic, and I think you're going to be impressed with the results of what we're going to do, but you should be aware there are limitations here as well. One of the obvious ones that you'll come up against very quickly, it's obviously not practical, right? We can't, if you're uploading Excel spreadsheets and storing them in the database, or Word documents, or even images, right? Binary large objects of basically any type. Well, to store old and new versions of those, that's just not practical. It's just too bulky, the amount of data that would be involved, right? Now, but we can at least record that they have been added or deleted, okay? And if there's a change to the file name, right? Things like that. We can log all of that information. But to store complete versions of old versions and new versions is just not really practical. Okay. Another thing that is a bit of a limitation is it's great we can pretty much automatically get it set up so everything is saved. But if we want to pull the data out for reporting purposes, right? We're going to have to do a fair bit of customization to code for the actual entity we want to report on ourselves, right? Getting the data stored is pretty much automatic, but to pull it out and make it meaningful in terms of presenting the information to the user, that's going to take some customized work. Now, it is true that, we're going to see a lot of code in the demo today in order to get that part of it done, to report on the full audit history of changes made to entities and so on. You could, consolidate this a little bit, create some reusable code and things like that with various different approaches. I'm not going to go down that road for the demo because, well, whenever you're learning something new, I think it's better to actually see in full detail all the work that has to get done. And you can think about optimizing your code later on. Okay, well, we're just about ready to get started here. I just want to mention, yes, once again, I'm going to use good old doctor patient. Please bear with me on that. And my demo will be based mostly on a full audit history for changes to a patient, right? So I suggest, following the demo, okay, you go back in, I'll post the code when we're done here, and you do the same thing for the doctor, right? And that way you can create different reports and so on all the audit history of changes to the doctors in the system. That'll give you a chance to put what we're going to do here into practice and reinforce the concepts themselves. Okay, well, that's basically, we're ready to start the demo. And so I've downloaded the latest version from our learning moments of the MVC application. Now, as I said, this is applicable to both Web API and MVC. The main difference is how you get the data out and show the audit history to the user. Clearly, that's why I'm using the MVC version of our medical office. With a Web API, we can pull the data, but we have to find a different way to actually get it up on the screen and displayed because the Web API doesn't have a user interface, right? But you'll see that the concepts are equivalent across the two. It's just how we get the reporting done. All right, let's get going.